Okay, so moving on to page 6, we are now looking for soldiers, scribes, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, servants, and slaves. We're going to get soldiers and scribes here. How did the Egyptian Empire continue to grow and thrive? Government officials and priests may have represented the pharaoh, but without the strength of the soldiers and the records of the scribes, there would have been no Egyptian empire. Soldiers. How did the Egyptian empire get so large? The Egyptian army used well-trained soldiers to expand its borders and maintain control of the people. Some soldiers fought on foot using spears, shields, and axes. Others rode behind horses in chariots and shot arrows. During times of peace, soldiers continued to work for the government, digging irrigation canals for farms or building temples. For a young Egyptian, life as a soldier was an opportunity to gain status. Young men could join the army and rise through the ranks. Successful soldiers were rewarded with gifts, including land and servants. So responsibility for soldiers should go down here. You can find that right in here. Scribes. Whenever Egyptian officials needed to write something down, scribes, or official government recorders, were there to write it. Scribes recorded court cases, calculated taxes, wrote letters between government officials, and kept official histories. Scribes wrote official documents in a system of picture symbols called hieroglyphics. They also used records and wrote less formal documents in similar script. Becoming a scribe took a lot of training. Scribes studied for many years, copying passages from sunrise to sundown. Only boys could train to be scribes, and many of those boys were sons of scribes. While most members of the elite and some skilled merchants and craftsmen could read and write, scribes created almost all the written records in ancient Egypt. And so we'll add page 6 to that, as well as page 7, as we're looking for merchants and craftsmen now, because we just did soldiers and scribes. Merchants and craftsmen. How did the pharaohs get so many artifacts for their temples and tombs? Who filled the pyramids with artifacts? Who brought Egyptian artifacts to faraway lands like Kush and Phoenicia? Craftsmen created many of the objects we see in the museums today. Merchants spread Egyptian goods and culture throughout the region. Merchants. Egypt was one of the wealthiest and most powerful empires of the ancient world. Goods from Egypt have been found throughout the Middle East and North Africa. These goods were carried by merchants or traders. Merchants would carry gold, jewelry, clothing, rope, and other Egyptian goods out of Egypt. They would meet merchants from other regions and trade for goods that could not be found in Egypt, such as elephant tusks from the south or cedar wood from Syria. Merchants also carried goods along the Nile to other parts of Egypt. Merchants did not always have a very high status, but they could become wealthy if they were careful traders. Wealthy officials often wanted rare goods from around the world for their homes and their tombs. So responsibilities of merchants, found there, comes here. Craftsmen. Almost every statue, jar, robe, or necklace from ancient Egypt that we see in a museum today was created by a craftsman. Ancient Egyptian craftsmen, also called artisans, usually inherited their trades from their fathers. At an early age, they began to learn to be stone carvers, metal workers, potters, jewelers, sculptors, and weavers. Craftsmen worked together in large workshops. Much of their work was created for government officials and other wealthy Egyptians. These powerful Egyptians used the art to decorate their homes and to fill their tombs. Ordinary Egyptians rarely had the wealth to buy the fine, decorated objects made by skilled craftsmen. The most talented workers in the shop became master craftsmen with additional power and responsibility. So, craftsmen, responsibilities, will go right there. Page 8, farmers and enslaved people. So that's going to come here and here. Who supplied Egypt's food and built the pyramids? Farmers. Although pharaohs and leaders may be the best remembered people from ancient Egypt, most Egyptians were farmers who lived off the land. Some farmers owned their own land, but many were peasants who worked on the land of the pharaoh or wealthy officials. Peasants did not own their land, and most of the crops they raised went to landowners for sale or trade. Farmers lived in simple houses made of mud bricks. They used the government-built irrigation systems and camels to carry water to their fields. Farmers also paid large portions of the crops they produced to the government officials as taxes, rent, or tribute to the local temple. Most historians believe that farmers also built the pyramids, temples, and other large projects. As part of their duty to the pharaoh, farmers were required to leave their homes and work as members of temporary crews that moved stones, built ramps, or made tools. These workers slept in villages and were paid by government officials with daily portions of bread, fish, and beverages. So responsibility of farmer will come right here. Servants and enslaved people. Although most historians and archaeologists agree that enslaved laborers did not do the majority of the work to build Egypt's temples and pyramids, enslaved people did fill a number of important roles in ancient Egypt. Enslaved people worked as servants in households or as laborers in the fields. Some enslaved people also worked dangerous jobs below ground in copper or gold mines. Enslaved people were often foreigners who had been captured in battles. Some enslaved people were peasants who sold their own freedom to pay off their debts. Enslaved people were considered the property of their owners and could be traded. The children of enslaved people became enslaved by their parents' owners. Enslaved people could also buy their freedom. So responsibilities of enslaved people comes down here, and that has us adding page 8. Page 9, Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt. So we're now looking for the answers to what kind of religion did ancient Egyptians have? Since we're talking about gods and goddesses, this answer will be on page 9. How did religion influence Egyptian society? The ancient Egyptians held very strong religious beliefs. For most of their history, they practiced polytheism, or the worship of many gods. So this will help you with number 6. The pharaoh was worshipped as the human version of the god Horus. This gave the pharaohs even greater power. The ancient Egyptians had gods and goddesses for many things, such as the sun and the sky. Often these gods took the form of people, animals, or both. Ra, the sun god, had a human body and the head of a hawk. In addition to Ra, other important gods included Anubis, god of the dead, guided dead souls to the underworld; Isis, goddess of fertility and motherhood, wife of Osiris and mother of Horus; Osiris, god of the underworld and resurrection; Horus, god of the sky and of the pharaohs; Seth, god of the desert and violence, brother of Osiris. Last but not least, page 10, Life After Death. Why were tombs so important to ancient Egyptians? This will help us answer, why were tombs so important to ancient Egyptians? What did they place in the tombs? And you'll see here that I gave you 2 starts to sentences. So tombs were so important to ancient Egyptians because, and you'll fill that out from this. After that, you will say placed in the tombs were, and tell me what was placed in the tombs. Ancient Egyptians believed that their souls would continue to live in the underworld after their bodies had died. For this reason, most Egyptians wanted to be buried near the relatives and friends. They also were buried with prized possessions, such as jewelry, so that they could have them in the afterlife. Just as pharaohs always had the finest things in life, the rulers of Egypt brought the finest things with them into the afterlife. Pharaohs were buried in elaborate tombs. Some, like Khufu's Great Pyramid at Giza, were large so that all could see them. Others, like King Tutankhamun's tomb, were a series of maze-like rooms cut into cliffs so that thieves would not be able to find them. These tombs took years to build, so work on a pharaoh's tomb often began long before a pharaoh took the throne. Statues, jewelry, and paintings all went into the tomb. Paintings and carvings on the wall celebrated a pharaoh's life. Once a pharaoh died, skilled priests mummified or embalmed, dried out, and wrapped the pharaoh's body so that it would not decompose. After this lengthy ritual, the body was placed in a coffin and carried to the tomb. Egyptians from all social classes were mummified to prepare for the afterlife. However, because the process was very expensive and could take up to several months, only bodies of the wealthiest Egyptians received the same treatment as the pharaohs. Poorer Egyptians were buried in simple graves with a few possessions. Thousands of years after the end of the last Egyptian dynasty, the artifacts, writings, and mummies in these tombs still teach us new details about life in ancient Egypt. So again, you'll have that last piece of information here from this page. Answer both of those questions and page 10. All right, until next time.